Are you the quantum mechanics?
Yes, we're the Quantum Mechanics. We're the paranormal podcast for the believers, the doubters, and everyone in between. Normally when we record, we have the dogs, or at least one of the dogs with us. We haven't got those today, but I wanted to thank all the people who've left us messages, including Meg, about how much they love our snoring dogs. Who would have thought we spend all this time researching the content and presenting great stories, but actually the dogs steal the show, understandably.
And also doing the audio engineering, buying the best mics. But yeah, there is something very comforting about a snoring dog.
There really is, although at 3 a.m, not always.
Well, that's what my partner says. Yeah, no, thank you for all the very nice comments recently. It is much appreciated.
And reviews. We really appreciate it. And if you want to take it a step further, you can always join us as a Patreon and support the podcast on patreon.com/TQMpod, or follow the links in the show notes. You get episodes roughly a week early. You get Ben and Peter's Extra Scoop, which is an exclusive follow-up episode after the main episode, which is only available on Patreon. Access to our Discord server and bingo card, which we play Paranormal Bingo along with, or our Patreons do. And we got a nice little community going, and it really helps support the podcast. So that's the plug and the appeal. If you fancy supporting us, hit the link or go to patreon.com/TQMpod.
That is true. And also, you get them ad-free.
You also get them ad-free.
But I don't know why I've started speaking staccato.
No, me neither, or in disjointed sentences. But I have absolutely no idea what we're going to do today. Absolutely no idea.
Okay, so what we've done recently, we've had quite a lot of alien material. We've had some haunted material. And I wanted to go back to something that we have spoken about in the past but have never covered, which is the peculiarities and the paranormal associated with human consciousness.
Okay. And
I started with Jeffrey Mishlov's monumental, I say monumental, it is a monumental essay, Beyond the Brain. Because what he does is tell stories that transcend what we think about as being human consciousness. So when we talk about ghost stories, we often mention the stone tape theory. We often mention, we sort of talk about conscious hauntings. But this is something beyond that. This is stories that illustrate that consciousness survives death and is probably something that we still haven't got a handle on. I mean, I say probably haven't got a handle on. We definitely haven't got a handle on. But these stories really, they're not ghost stories. They're definitely not alien stories. They're stories about humans who do things that we can't possibly imagine. And I want to start with something that absolutely blew my mind. This is the story about a ghost who came back with a professional development plan. And I say a ghost, what I mean is a human consciousness, a spirit. This isn't something that rattles chains or does spooky whispers. This is a case of a new, highly effective and world-renowned psychotherapy system that was being delivered after death to a recipient.
Wow, okay.
It begins with two men. Dr. Siegfried Fischer, who was a respected psychiatrist who trained in the same Viennese circles as the legendary Alfred Adler. We probably have all heard of Alfred Adler. If you haven't, he sort of invented quite a lot of the way we think about counselling, I would say. He later worked at the Langley Porter Neuropsychiatric Institute in San Francisco, and he was a serious man of science. The second man was Bob Hoffman. He was a tailor from Oakland, California, who had once been a patient of Dr. Fischer. And this is kind of where it gets weird. In 1966, Dr. Fischer passed away. A year goes by, nothing happens. Then one night, Bob Hoffman wakes up, standing at the foot of his bed is the unmistakable figure of his former psychiatrist, Siegfried Fischer. Now, Hoffman could have dismissed this as a dream, but the communication that followed was very, very specific. According to Kenneth Ireland, who worked very closely with Hoffman for years, the discarnate Mr. Fisher, or Dr. Fisher I should say, proceeded to reveal what he called the missing link in psychoanalytic therapy. He communicated an entire therapeutic framework centered on a concept he called negative love. The idea that streams of negative behaviours and emotional patterns are passed down unconsciously from one generation to the next. But it wasn't a lecture. Fisher's spirit then guided Hoffman, the tailor, through his own psychic therapy right there and then. Hoffman was then taken on a tour of his own inherited pain, uncovering the roots of his deepest emotional wounds. He was given such a profound understanding of how these patterns had shaped his life and how they shaped his parents' lives that he was able to complete, in terms of therapy, it's called forgiveness. He realised in a moment of soul-shaking clarity that everyone is guilty and no one is to blame. Now, this all sounds mad. I can forgive you if you think, oh, okay, well, this is just, somebody having a hallucination and there's a ghost, and where does it go to? Before disappearing, Fisher's spirit told Hoffman that he had unfinished karma and that Hoffman was now tasked with bringing his new therapy to the world to help Fisher move on. Hoffman, who was utterly bewildered, asked, how can I, a tailor, enter the world of professional psychotherapy? The spirit's final message was, doors will open. And they did. The prominent and respected psychiatrist Claudio Naranjo took a profound interest in Hoffman's work and championed it. This was born the work of the Fisher-Hoffman psychic therapy, later known as the Hoffman quandary process. It grew into a worldwide movement. It's still active and popular today, more than 2 decades after Bob Hoffman's own death. It's a system that has helped thousands of people, and it's a communication from a dead psychiatrist. Now, here's the critical layer of corroboration. The conspicuous researcher Charles T. Tart, who I'd never heard of before, but just bear with me, he had personally experienced the Hoffman process in a group led by Naranjo Tart, who was a scientist, and he admitted that his first impression when meeting Bob Hoffman was that the man was a total phony. He found him opinionated, not very smart, and certainly not psychic. But Tart trusted his friend, so he went through an 8-week therapy, and it changed him. It was only after the process that Tart had this realization. His negative judgments of Hoffman were a complete psychological projection. Hoffman's mannerisms were almost identical to Tart's own father, who Tart had a difficult relationship. And so where we get to is this loop. A tailor receives this therapy from a ghost. This therapy goes on to turn into something that is accepted worldwide. And a skeptical worldwide psychologist, through his own experience, verifies not just the therapeutic power of the process, but the profound psychological truths it uncovered. Now, nobody has really got to the bottom of how this happened, and it really is a peculiar ghost story, but it did form the basis of a particular branch of psychotherapy.
So if we wheel back a bit,
yeah.
So this information was given to this person by a ghost.
Yes.
The whole process in one visitation?
So no, this is something that recurred and was reoccurring, and it was something that he was skeptical about, but it kept coming back in dreams, and every time he had a dream about it, it stuck more than the other dreams.
Right. So it felt different.
It felt different. Yeah. And don't forget, he is just a tailor. He's a suit maker. He doesn't know anything about the human mind, not really. And yet he manages to form a process that other people can follow to help people heal.
He managed to stitch it together.
Yes, he did. Yes.
So I'm assuming by this, Dr. Fisher, let's go with it, passes away, has some revelation about, oh my God, this is how therapy should be.
That's right. From a revelation he gets from wherever he is now, yes.
Yeah, okay. And decides to come and communicate this back
To Hoffman,
to
who was
Hoffman,
his
the tailor.
patient. Yes.
Yeah. What was unique about this type of therapy at the time? What was, if you were going to post-it note its uniqueness, what would it be?
So what he brought in was this idea of there is no blame. Before this therapy came through, there was this idea that there was somebody to blame. It was the parents, it was a relationship, it was yourself for being too weak, it was yourself for being too strong. And what he did was introduce this idea of there is nobody to blame. You don't look around for a blame. You look more internally. So I think we're kind of used to that at the moment, aren't we? We're used to...
What we call unconditional positive regard is a therapeutic term that would probably cover that.
Right, and probably our listeners don't know that you are qualified to say that is a thing.
Yeah.
What had happened before was this idea, and this comes up in some of the Freudian stuff, I believe, where it's kind of like, oh, well, you blame your parents or you blame the experiences you've had. What he did was pilot this idea of, if nobody is to blame, then where do you look? And it doesn't cause people to self blame. It just unlocks other ideas that can be brought in to heal that person, and that's what formed this idea, which, as I understand it, is now practiced extensively.
But it's interesting. I was thinking, if we take it from a more skeptical perspective, okay, this guy who received this message is just a tailor. But it's interesting. People do pick up the nuances of therapy and the therapeutic process when they are the client in therapy, because, some people spend quite a lot of time. It's quite an intense relationship between a therapist and a client. So, that's whether you're kind of teaching some of the theory behind it or not, that people do figure out how it works. So, I guess the skeptical side was he learnt through his experience of being in therapy what he might like as a therapist, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think that does make sense. And that is probably the materialistic and real world explanation for it. I think that's true. Except it was taken on as something that people bought into.
Well, if it works, right?
Exactly.
Some of how you were describing it sound as quite, obviously there's a ghost, but quite spiritual in nature. You mentioned karma, so was there a bit of that in the theory as well, by the sounds of it?
I think the karma thing, I think that's quite difficult to come to terms with, because the spirit, as it says, never really explained it. What was revealed to him was this kind of, he calls it the missing link. This is what you should do to help people, and it was only revealed to him in the afterlife. And that, I will say, this kind of idea of how can I, a tailor, enter the world of a professional psychotherapy, there is some stagecraft there, and I totally get you.
Well, the other thing I wanted to say was the guy who received the message, the tailor, I would have been sitting there going, I've been paying $100 an hour for this for the last 5 years. I could have got it for free off a ghost.
Yes. And also, it's never quite clear why he received this message. Right. Presumably, it was because he was his client and he was open to it. But we're never really sure
So there
about
were
that.
no examples of other clients of
No.
the psychiatrist having the same
No,
visitation.
no. But it made me think about, we did that episode on the surgeon who was doing the basically psychic surgery, and he was doing it with rusty knives and going in with his hand, and he was curing people, and nobody could ever find an explanation. And that was tied down to what was the explanation was that it was a German surgeon who had passed away and was possessing
Yes,
him.
that's right, yeah.
And this feels very similar to that. And there's no reason why they couldn't be different. And again, nobody has been able to completely debunk this particular scenario.
Interesting, really interesting.
Let's move on to the Watseka Wonder. And this goes back to 1878 in the town of Watseka, Illinois. And our subject is a young lady called Lorena Venom, not spelt like that, Vennum. She was unwell. She was suffering from fits and trances. And her friends and family feared that she would be sent to an insane asylum, which in the 19th century was perfectly reasonable, but it was a terrible fate.
Yeah.
A concerned community member who knew her parents was a spiritualist named Asa Roth. And she gets to hear about the girl's plight because she's going to Sunday school, she's going to church, and she's causing disruptions, and nobody really knows what's going on. And Asa's own daughter, Mary, had died 10 years earlier, and she had suffered from a similar illness, and they think it's an illness. Roth, who believed in the survival of consciousness, suggested something, I guess, extraordinary. What if a friendly, gentle spirit could take hold of her body, helping her to heal it while her own troubled spirit rested? And he suggested his own deceased daughter, Mary. So this is an extraordinary idea.
It's like a reverse possession, or,
Yes.
we think of a possession as a demonic thing, but this is almost I don't
This
want
is
to
a-
use a religious term, but almost an angelic
An
possession.
angelic, yes, exactly. But it takes quite a lot of belief to realise that could ever be a thing. And it's also mad, it's a mad thing to suggest to somebody whose child is very ill. But the parents were really desperate, and they agreed. And under hypnosis, facilitated by a spiritualist physician, and he's got a brilliant name, Winchester Stevens, Winchester Stevens,
There's been some good names in this story so far.
Lurancy appeared to communicate with spirits and confirmed that Mary Roth would come. And suddenly, Lurancy Venom's personality vanished. In her place was a girl who claimed to be Mary Roth. She didn't recognise the Venom family, and she treated them with a polite but distant courtesy. So there's examples where, basically this is their child, and she's invited down for dinner, and she's sitting around the dinner table, and she politely refuses. And when, in all intents and purposes, her mother says, no, you should sit here and eat your food, she says no and walks off. And she refuses to accept the authority of her parents, and yet she is their daughter. She was not herself. But when she was taken to the Roth household, she was home. She instantly recognised the family members. She called them by long-forgotten nicknames.
Yeah.
She knew the layout of the house, and she pointed to objects that Mary had owned and recounted memories from Mary's life that Lurancy could not possibly have known. She expressed deep affection for the Roths, treating them as her true parents. She lived as Mary Roth in the Roth home, and for 3 months and 10 days, that was her.
God, that for the parents.
I know, isn't
It's
it
almost,
terrible?
it's almost like having your child taken, really, from
Yes,
you.
yes.
Oh, wow.
It's a different face on somebody else's daughter. But this is the way they looked at it. They said she wasn't a girl with a mental illness who was pretending, And the sheer volume of specific verified information she provided was staggering. So the way that they thought about it was, in the way that they'd first figured it, was this was a caretaker spirit in their daughter's body.
How was it helping her, though? Because I'm assuming in that process, she was lost, if we go with it.
She was lost.
So I'm not sure how it helps her in the long term. Are
Well,
we saying that the people who did it were doing it because they wanted their daughter back rather for an altruistic purpose? Or
No, it was because what they felt was the soul of their actual daughter was so tormented it needed to rest. That was the the principle of it.
Some time off, come back, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. We know that in the 1800s there were very reputable people who got caught up in various different paranormal cases. I mean, we know about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and the fairies and stuff. But this case so impressed the Harvard psychologist William James, who was a huge figure in intellectual society at the time, that he wrote about it in his book, The Principles of Psychology. And after his own trusted colleague, who was a researcher called Richard Hodgson, travelled to Watseka and cross-examined all the principal witnesses, Hodgson's conclusion was that the evidence increasingly gave weight to the plausibility of the spiritualistic interpretation of the phenomena. And this is a real game changer, not just in the spiritual movement, but in the psychology movement, because William James was not a sort of a bit part player. He wrote things that people stood up and listened to. And the idea that this girl had her spirit replaced suddenly seemed not so weird. But it has a really deeply strange ending. After about 3 months, the Mary personality announced that it was time for Lorancy to come back. And just like that, Lorancy Venom's personality returned to her own body, not as a sick, disturbed child, but as someone who was completely healed and mentally sound. The experience, as she testified, had saved her from the asylum. Now, there were critics. So the highly respected researcher Frederick Myers, for example, tried to explain it away with complex psychological theories. So he proposed this idea of pseudo-possession, suggesting that Lorance's secondary personality, gifted with extraordinary psychic powers, was masquerading as Mary Roth, telepathically reading information from the minds of the Roth family. Now that sounds almost as bonkers as when I read it out.
If you go with it in a slightly simpler form, apart from the bits of the story where you're saying she knew things that only the daughter would know, apart from that bit of the story, there could be something in that, because there are those theories, aren't there, about the Enfield poltergeist story, that it was about not even consciously but subconsciously getting attention, and the trouble that the family had broken up and the daughters wanted attention, not in a malicious way, but almost in a subconscious way, and people are paying attention, and you kind of convince yourself and go along with it. So apart from the fact that there are details that the possessed body shouldn't know, you could go with that theory, but it's that bit that's interesting, isn't it? Recognising the family members and all that stuff.
Recognising the family members, recognising the layout of the house, recognising the nicknames and everything. There's a load of stuff in there that child couldn't possibly know.
And when she came back, did she say what had happened to her in those 3 months? Was she just nothing?
That's really interesting. Yeah, it's nothing. It's nothing. And she said she comments on how she was recuperating. And there is a quote where she says she's a different person, but not a different person in terms of her spirit or personality. She says that she's healed. And when you look at it, when she was headed for quite a dark place in medical history. And she went on to live a perfectly normal life after this. And the spirit of the other girl never resurfaced. So it's either very strong suggestion to them, or there is something more in it.
The family, though, God, can you imagine that 3 months? The family of the daughter who's suddenly now possessed and living with somebody else who suggested the whole thing in the first place. There must have been moments when they were going, what's going on here? Should we have done this? There must have been, right?
Oh, of course, absolutely, because it's such a big deal to go through it. And then when somebody starts talking to you through that, I think the other part of it is like, because we've spent a lot of time talking about Hungry Ghosts and that book. I think part of it was a worry that this wasn't the other girl. It was a darker spirit. It was something
trickster or something.
Trickster, and to use a Christian term, it was demonic, and that is still entirely possible, except the girl comes back and she's absolutely fine, which you wouldn't expect.
And I've not come across that. Let's call it angelic possession for the sake of it. I've not come across other stories about that. In your research, did you find other examples of that?
Let me give you one.
Wow, okay.
So, Mishlove also presents another case which is more modern. It's the case of Shiva and Sumitra and something that's called replacement reincarnation. So, this involves, again, the death and representation of a soul. In 1985, a woman named Sumitra Singh lived in a village in India, and she was suffering from a very serious illness. She was a married woman with children, but importantly, she was not formally educated, and she couldn't read or write. That does come up later in the story. After a period of experiencing fits and various other health problems, she had an evening where she literally just stopped breathing. In fact, she turned cold and she was declared dead by a doctor. As is the case in that country, her family were preparing her body for cremation, but she had this kind of miraculous revival. But the woman who woke up was not Sumitra. She looked at the grieving family with confusion and claimed her name was Shiva Tripathi. She said that her sister-in-law had murdered her a few months earlier. This new personality that came through was an educated, well-spoken woman who demanded to be taken to her birth family, the Tripathis. The Singh family and her husband and children were complete strangers to her. Now, the crucial detail that elevates this case beyond, I guess, what you'd call conventional explanation is this. The Tripathi family lived over 100 kilometres away, and had been absolutely no contact or communication between the two families. They didn't know each other. There was no way for Sumitra to have learned the intricate details of a family living, at that time, a day's journey away. But eventually the word reached the Tripathi family that a woman in another village was claiming to be their deceased daughter. Shiva had indeed died under mysterious circumstances. Her body was found on railroad tracks after a quarrel with her in-laws. Her family had sued the in-laws, suspecting murder. Anyway, they saw that it was fit to arrange a visit. When they arrived, the woman, who was Sumitra in body but Shiva in spirit, hugged and kissed them, calling them all by their family nicknames, again family nicknames, and recounting personal memories from her life as Shiva. This is not just something that I'm recounting. There was a 1992 BBC documentary on the case that revealed the depth of the evidence. It was researched by a researcher called Satwant Parisha, and the legendary, so I'm told from the BBC notes, Ian Stevenson. Shiva was able to name 22 relatives from photographs and provide 16 specific facts about her life that were not in any press reports.
I don't think I could name 20 relatives.
No, nor could I. No, genuinely. No, it's my Granny Joan, Grandpa Jack, and my mum and dad. That's probably it.
Now I've got your internet passwords, you're in trouble.
But what's more, it wasn't a temporary state. The personality of Shiva Tripathi remained in Sumitra Singh's body until her death in 1998. So that was 13 years.
Wow.
No, she consistently maintained her identity, wrote letters that were very sophisticated and unlike what the body that she was inhabiting could achieve, and even had 2 more children while she was living as Shiva.
So did she shun her previous family, or was she just...
No.
Was it almost a throuple kind of scenario?
No, she didn't shun them. She recognised who they were, but she treated them more like an adopted family, almost like like a foster family,
right,
I guess
right.
you would take it. So she obviously bore no ill to them, and she did still retain her memories of growing up in that family. But what was interesting about it was the layered on memories of the new family. And this was investigated there was a Canadian anthropologist, Antonia Mills, who did a follow-up study in 2010. And she interviewed the witnesses who had seen Shiva's personality. And they had said that it had been persistent for 13 years. So she never dropped it. It wasn't something that she would do during the day to obtain attention, and then in the evening she'd kind of go, "Oh, that was a crazy thing," and that's what you might expect. Like if somebody was trying to pass this off as something that wasn't real, they would slip up. Yes.
Yeah. You don't drink Baby Sham. What are you doing?
Hey, I'll have a Baby Sham.
Yeah. What's been going through my mind thinking about that story? If you follow it through, the original woman, it dies, right? Or gets to the point of death or close to. Mm-hmm. That suggests that her spirit, if we go with it, leaves her body and the other spirit then kind of entered and took it over, right? Is that what we're saying?
She's kind of a walk-in, basically. Yes.
Right, wow. Which means it should happen all the time, shouldn't it? Or
it should happen all the time.
What's unique about that case, or what I mean?
So there are. So we. To be fair, in my research, I have got many more books which I'm going to bring you about people who walk in. So there are people who have terrible circumstances in their current life, and then one day they wake up and they don't really recognise anything that's around them. And some people would call that like the Mandela effect. But there are some who say, no, I'm a different spirit. So I have come across stories, and I as I say, I'm researching them. The books are kind of quite thick and dense, and I want to go through them properly to bring you the stories.
I want to be possessed with somebody who's already read them.
Oh, yes, absolutely. That would be brilliant. But there are stories of people who, for example, they've lost their job, they have lost their partner, they're bringing up a number of children that they now find very difficult to do so. And then one day they wake up and everything is different. Suddenly they realise that they could do this. Suddenly they realise that their partner didn't mean anything. But this isn't like a revelation where they have kind of just sort of shaken themselves up and gone, oh, I need to do this. They specifically say, the person that I was yesterday is not the person I was today, because the memories that they have, when they go back and look at, for example, family photographs that their mother has, they don't remember them until somebody talks them through it. And they believe very strongly that they have become a walk-in spirit. The previous spirit has lost all of its ability to look after that body, and this spirit has come in. And one of the things that comes up with that is then, is there such a thing as a life plan where the spirit and the soul who originally inhabited that body sort of says in their manuscript, oh, okay, so at this point I'm going to leave the body to somebody else. And the evidence actually points to, yes, that is sometimes the case.
So you going, I want to give it up to someone else, almost by choice.
Yes, exactly. Yes, yes, at this point. And the reason for that is because the spirit that is going to take over the body has no desire to be a baby, to go through all the teenage years, all the stuff that we don't like, but it has something to achieve. And they make a deal with another soul that says, yeah, no, I'm cool, we're doing all of that, and at some point you can take over. That sounds highly, highly bizarre, and I wouldn't expect you to believe it. There are many reasons not to believe it, but there are many reasons in the books that I've just been dabbling with that it does make perfect sense. There's one very particular story, and I'm teasing this now and I will come into it later. A woman, she is 16 years hence been inhabiting this particular body, and she says that her life changed. There's one night she goes to sleep and she doesn't know how she's going to make it through the night. She's very seriously considering drinking a bottle of vodka and taking some pills. Her life has fallen away. Her job has gone. Her partner has gone. Her kids, who are grown up, don't want to know her anymore. When she wakes up in the morning, she says all the colours are different. All of her experiences are different. She goes downstairs and she starts stroking a pillow, a cushion, and she's like, I've never felt anything like this before. And she realizes that the reason for this is because she has not been incarnate for many years, and everything feels different. The texture of butter, the smell of tea, the taste of an M&M, they're all so novel to her that she realizes that she is what you call a walk-in. And this is what we're talking about here, is a walk-in spirit. And we don't know what happens to the spirit that they displace. Sometimes it appears that they are willing to displace, and sometimes it feels like it's done through necessity.
Yeah, I'd want to see the brochure about where I was going, wouldn't you?
Well, yeah, of course I would, of course. Yeah. But let me take you to another scenario, because what we've spoken about before has been, I would guess, what you call emotional reunions that are subjective, the ability to look around a house and understand its layout. I mean, houses are houses, you could do that. It's not particularly, I guess, intellectually rigorous, but this is something that Mishlove calls the chess match. The game took place between 1987 and 1993. On one side was Victor Corcioni, who's a living chess legend and one of the most formidable players of the 20th century. On the other side is, unbelievably, a spirit called Géza Marcozzi, who's a Hungarian chess master who was one of the best players in the world and died in 1951. And this is an experiment. This is not just conjecture. It's an experiment.
I'm just thinking the other chess guy was like, I waited all that time for him to die, so I'd be number one, and now he's come back.
Exactly. Yes. And that is a very valid thing to think, because if you had that state of mind, you go, oh, yeah, no, I'm definitely playing against the spirit of him. Yeah. But no, this is a proper experiment. And it's the brainchild of Wolfgang Eisenbeis. That's a brilliant name to say, isn't it? Who's a Swiss economist, and he's a psychical researcher. And the logic is impeccable. If a discarnate mind could demonstrate a skill as complex and unique as Grandmaster level chess, it would be evidence to the highest order. He recruited Corcioni and a medium named Robert Rowlands. Critically, Rowlands, who was obviously the medium, he was not a chess player. He was taught just enough to record the moves in standard chess notation via automatic writing, but he couldn't play. He'd never played in his life. Right. On June the 15th, 1985, through Rowlands, the spirit of Marcosi communicated his willingness to play. And from the very beginning, Marcosi established his identity. He played with a style and skill that was undeniably that of the Grandmaster. Corcioni himself, in the middle of the game, commented on how well his deceased opponent was playing, admitting he wasn't sure he could win. But the evidence goes way beyond a skillful win. Eisenbus and his team posed dozens of questions and obscure questions to Marcosi about his life. He correctly answered, and this is really extraordinary, 79 out of 81 questions. Wow. That's a 97.5 accuracy rate for information that was extremely hard to verify. Here's an example. They asked Marcosi to name an Italian chess master he had played against. His response named the man as Max Rohim. The researchers initially chalked this up as an error, as the Italian master was known as Massimiliano Romi, but later they discovered that his family was of Croatian origin and his original Croatian name was indeed Max Rohim. It wasn't just that fact, it was an incredibly obscure private piece of information that Discarnate Marcosi provided, a detail that initially seemed wrong but ultimately was proven to be correct. Now we're going to get into somebody that we all know, Russell Targ, the physicist and parapsychologist. He later asked his brother-in-law, who was the World Chess Championship Bobby Fischer, to analyse the game. Fischer, who was one of the greatest minds in chess history, confirmed that the moves played by Marcosi were indeed of Grandmaster caliber. Neuropsychologist Vernon Knepp, another name in here you don't need to know, but just it's another person, also an avid chess player, analysed the game and confirmed that Marcosi played an opening move that was considered good in 1905, but became understood as inferior after Marcosi's death due to the discovery of a new counterplay. It was the play of a mind from another era. This spirit is playing a game that is very smart and on the ball, but from a few years earlier.
This guy would be brilliant at Mastermind, wouldn't he?
Yes, he would. Yes, yes.
What's your specialist subject? The Life and Times of Marcosi.
So what's really interesting about this is that I didn't realise that an opening move in 1905 would become, I guess, superseded by something that was later invented. Like every time I learned to play chess, and I played chess with my dad when I was 8, and he bought me a chess machine, and you put the pawns up, either 1 or 2, then you get the knights out, and then you get the bishops out. But when I read this essay, he makes it very, very clear that there are, I guess you call them fashionable moves. And in 1905, the move that the spirit, in inverted commas, plays is then replayed later on as a masterpiece in this particular game, and it mirrors exactly what this chess master player was doing.
This is where you were going wrong, though, Ben, when you were playing chess. You were always getting your bishop out.
In front of my dad. Well, it's always difficult, isn't it? Because the horse can jump and the bishop can only go diagonally. Anyway.
But it's funny, though, because it's funny, that bit of chess, because when I was much younger, I was quite good at chess and played quite a lot. I did tournaments and stuff. But then you get to that point where you've got to memorise all the moves and all the counter moves, and that's when I kind of lost interest in it. I quite liked the cut and thrust of playing, and but when it was all set moves and set counter moves, I kind of lost interest in it a bit. But it's a funny game in that sense.
It is a weird game, and that is why it becomes such an empirical test for a grandmaster, because it's very clear to anyone that has played it. Even just playing against my dad, I can understand that people have a style, and what he had uncovered was somebody playing a very specific style that completely mirrored what was happening, with this grandmaster.
It's reminded me of, have you ever seen that Darren Brown thing where he takes on
Yes.
6 or 7 chess masters, and all he was doing was basically getting them to play
Repeating
against
the
each other?
moves.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's really simple. I
It's-
mean, you never know with Darren Brown if that's what's going on, but let's assume it is.
No, it's a great idea, but these ideas are presented by Mishlove as, I don't presume to say that he's saying it is undisputed evidence, because he doesn't say that, but it is evidence that is very, very hard to pull down.
The interesting bit about it, though, is how do you initiate this? Do you go to a psychic and say, we want to do this experiment, it's a chess experiment, find us a dead chess master? Or did the psychic come to him and said, I'm in contact with the chess? Do you know what I mean? Which comes first in that? Because that assumes that the psychic's so good he could get anyone you wanted, right? If you're being specific.
Yeah. And so the way that he hears about these is the way that everybody else heard about them, which is they're reported on by local news sources, and there are people who pass it around by word of mouth. That is absolutely true.
But going for the individual person, because do you know what I'm saying? So did the psychic say, I've been in contact with the chess master, so he then goes, I can do this experiment? Or did he goes, I'm going to do an experiment using chess, and goes to a psychic and says, I need a chess master?
Oh no, it's the first. It's the first. When they hear about what's happening, they devise an experiment to test
around
it.
the psychics. Right.
Yes, exactly.
So again, if you were a cynic, you could say carefully engineered by the psychic, researched the guy's history, all of it, in a mastermind type way, and maybe was a great chess player.
Yes, possibly. Although I would say that Mishlove doesn't, these are not unresearched cases. I think what he's doing is trying to provide enough evidence to show that his hypothesis.
Because that's the bit in the stories, isn't it? The first story and this story, it's almost, the guy's a tailor, so he could never do this.
Yeah.
This psychic is not a chess master, so he could never do this. But that's a big assumption in that sense.
Yeah. No, that's true. But this isn't the end of the stories. I've got more, and these are not all from Mishlove. So we've spoken a lot about Bigelow, right? Not Juice Bigelow, but
Skinwalker Bigelow.
Exactly, Skinwalker Bigelow, who
bought Skinwalker Ranch, space and weapon engineer.
Aerospace entrepreneur.
Yeah, billionaire.
And he has spent, I guess what he would say is a lifetime grappling with questions of existence. And he founded the Bigelow Institute of Consciousness Studies in 2021. And he, along with various other people, including a gentleman called Dr. Pim van Lommel, who's a Dutch cardiologist, and others, put together a series of stories that sort of build on Mishlov's work and tell you a little bit more about things that give evidence for this life. I would say life after death. I would say continuation of consciousness. So this is an interesting one. So we've heard about now, playing chess and people who recognise family members. That's all good.
Yep.
This one I found really weird. This, as I say, this one comes from Pim van Lommel. During a night shift, a 44-year-old man is rushed to the coronary care unit. He's comatose, his skin is blue through lack of oxygen, and he's been found unconscious in a field about an hour earlier. His heart is not beating, he's not breathing, and the resuscitation team begins extensive CPR. A nurse on the team preparing to intubate the patient to provide oxygen discovered that the man has dentures in his mouth. He removes the upper set and according to the urgency of the moment, places them on the crash cart. So he just rips them out, puts them on the cart next to him, and he specifically remembers putting them on the lower sliding shelf of this custom-built cart. So we know what this looks like. In a hospital theatre, you have all these places to put all the instruments and whatever, and he just whips these dentures out, puts them on this lower sliding shelf. It takes an hour and a half to bring this guy back to life, but eventually he has a heartbeat and blood pressure, but the patient remains in a coma. He's taken to the intensive care unit. For an entire week, he's in this coma. He finally regains his consciousness about 10 days later, and he's moved back to the cardiac ward. And the nurse who removed his dentures happens to be distributing medication. The moment the patient sees him, he says, "Oh, that nurse knows where my dentures are." This nurse is completely stunned. The patient then explains, "Yes, but you were there when I was brought into the hospital. You took the dentures out of my mouth and you put them on that cart. It had all these bottles on it and there was a sliding drawer underneath, and there's where you put my teeth." So let's be very clear about the conditions here. The man was in a deep coma. His heart was not pumping blood. For all clinical purposes, he was dead. Dr. Van Lommel, who operated on him, emphasises that this state, there was no measurable electrical activity in the brain. The EEG is a flat line. It's not just that he was unconscious, the physical organ associated with it was offline. The patient went on to describe, from a vantage point, he says, from above his own body, he's looking down upon himself, and we hear this a number of times. He's in the resuscitation room. He describes the doctors and nurses working on his, at that time, lifeless form. He has a detailed description of this unique custom-built crash cart and the specific location of where his dentures were put. There is no classical, medical or scientific explanation for how this could be. He couldn't have seen it, his brain was non-functional, he didn't regain consciousness for over a week. We have seen and heard similar stories to this, and some of them have been tested, and I understand that all those tests didn't come out positive. In fact, there was a test at the local John Radcliffe Hospital where they put trainers on the roof and asked patients if they could see the roof, and right. There's
been other ones with written notes, haven't there? And words.
That's correct. Yeah. Yes. Either there is something going on here that we don't understand in terms of how consciousness operates, or there was a state where his consciousness persisted beyond the coma, but he very much saw where his teeth were, basically.
Well, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because everybody associates this with a near-death experience, these types of things. That's the, can you see something, on the ceiling or whatever. But it's interesting to think that in certain conditions, your brain is pumping like crazy when you're dying. Maybe it does unleash some power that we rarely use. That's just a normal medical scientific process that occasionally, 1 in a million, you can tell those things.
Yeah, very, very similar to...
A bit like superhuman strength.
I was just going to say, yes.
Yeah. I mean, that episode we did on superhuman strength, I was thinking about that today, weirdly. I don't know why, but the story of the guy who held the car up, I think, was it guy or mother? I can't remember. It may have been a guy who somebody got trapped underneath it in the workshop, but held it for 10 minutes. Yeah. And I know we went into the detail in that episode about how, we always say 2.5 ton car, but the way you lift it, it's not actually lifting 2.5 tons because of the tyres, leverage tyres, whatever. But to hold something for 10 minutes does feel like you unleash some super. I think in that episode we talked about some scientific research. I haven't got my notes with me, but the point of when you think you are out of strength, you've probably only used 50% of your strength. You know what I mean?
Yes.
There's this, or 70%, something like that. So that's an interesting thought, isn't it? That rather than in the example you're talking about, some spiritual life after death connection, it's just a natural human function that we're not aware of that gets triggered very rarely.
Yeah, I think that is completely possible. But I suppose the questions that arise are, if that was true, how long after death would it cease? And it also raises the question of, how do we define death? Because if he wasn't dead, which he clearly, he's come back to life. So we often talk about, I was dead for half an hour or whatever. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was observing. But he does talk about being in this state where he's floating above the room. And like I said, I think we're all very familiar with that as a story. But the fact that he knew exactly where his dangers were, it's not completely without doubt that, he could say, well, I assume it's on a trolley. It's just the very specific details that he gives about the trolley. But you don't know what state he was in when he came in. And I don't know. I think it's a super interesting case, but maybe you wouldn't hang your hat on it.
Well, people know I've just moved house. I could do with some of that technique. I spent half an hour looking for an Allen key today that's in a box somewhere. Do you know what I mean? It's like anything I need, I can't find. Anything I don't need, I go, I might need that at some point, and then it disappears. So I could use some of that superpower at the moment.
Only 4% of the population know where their Allen key is. That is
true. That is true. And to be honest, they don't want a near-death experience to get an Allen key.
They don't. No. Let me give you another one, because this is very different, and I think it adds more weight to it. Okay. So this comes from a doctor called Bruce Grayson, not Larry. And he talks about a family who's gathered around the bedside of a matriarch who's got severe Alzheimer's. For 5 years, she hasn't recognised her own children. She can't speak. She can't connect. Her brain, as far as scans would show, is full of this Alzheimer's. One afternoon, she opens her eyes. She looks at her daughter, smiles and says her name, and then asks about her grandchildren, reminisces about her wedding day, and shares some family anecdotes. This is not unusual. We hear this a lot in tales of people who are in nursing homes. But what is unusual is that the family get 2 clear hours with this woman that they thought had gone forever. Wow. And the next day she passes away. So for 2 hours, she's completely lucid, and it hasn't been that case for 5 years. It's not a miracle in the religious sense. It's a documented, repeatable medical phenomena. And Dr. Grayson argues that this strongly supports a filter or a transceiver model of the brain. He says that the idea is that the brain doesn't create consciousness, but channels or limits a much broader consciousness. So in terms of this terminal lucidity, the theory suggests that as far as the brain's filtering mechanism goes, it completely breaks down in the final stages of dying, and it can no longer constrain the consciousness. So what you get is this full, intact mind, which is allowed to shine through one last time. So basically, the idea that you've got Alzheimer's is it sort of denigrates you for a while, but as you're about to pass, the brain changes to a different state, and the receiver is on high alert, if you like. And so what you're getting is the clearest signal you've got for many years.
It's a bit like that movie, Awakenings. Do you remember that movie? With De
I
Niro
do, yes.
And
yes.
Robin Williams, where they some new trial drug, isn't it? And everyone just comes back, but it only lasts it doesn't last, and they all... Yeah, that's a really good movie. But it almost sounds like a gift, doesn't it? A 2-hour gift.
It's a 2-hour
certainly
gift,
for the family, I would think.
Yeah, I agree.
Was this just before the person's passing, or...?
Yeah, she died the next day.
Right. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, and you get this a lot with those stories of. So there's many nursing home stories of people who are on their deathbed, and they reach forward and they they say the name of their dead wife or their children or even their animal, and they seem very contented. And there's even stories about when they talk about they need to get their luggage together. There are a number of stories where they say, I need to pack. And these are people who are completely bedridden, either with physical or mental illnesses, and they're very much at the end of their life. And the nurse says, what are you packing for? And they go, I'm going on a journey. The train will be here soon. And they use this train analogy. They talk about how they're like these people who are definitely not with them at the time. They're waiting for me at the station, and they want to take their packed bags with them. And then the next day they're gone. And this is very interesting in terms of the story we've just heard, because it suggests, like that doctor says, that perhaps the consciousness isn't something that denigrates inside the human brain and isn't sort of a function of this very rapidly diminishing amount of grey matter, but it is something that is received from a different place. And that would make sense in terms of all those other people appearing in the stories. And that would also make sense for the other stories we heard, where if you say, I'm going to step out of my body for a bit, there is no medical explanation for that apart from you've just changed the receiver from radio 1 to radio 2. That makes perfect sense.
It's reminding me of, I think this is right, the story of, there's that Underworld album, and it was named after one of the guy's father just before he died, turned to his wife and said, Barbara, Barbara, we face the shining future.
Oh.
And that was his last words. Which amazing, right? It's reminding me of that there's something. Now I know the traditional argument for that would be, your body's pumping so many chemicals in, and you're trying to make, death a not pleasant experience. I can't think of the word. Tolerable experience, maybe, or some euphoria to get you through, or your body's just reacting so much. But still, it's a comforting thought, though.
It is. I think Steve Jobs did he not say, it's full of stars? I think.
No, he said, change the charger design one more time. That was his final word.
Naughty. Yes, I agree. But, I think all of these things add together. I really wanted to cover this because we speak a lot about the stone tape theory, right? Mm. And we spoke about that a few weeks ago when we were talking about the World War II bombers seen over the Peak District. And when we talk about that, I suppose we don't often go into the great detail of what stone tape theory really means is we're saying that these are sort of VHS recordings of the past and there's no sentience there. And then we talk about hauntings where there clearly is a sentience, but we're never sure whether it is a deceased human or, when in the case of a poltergeist, maybe it's something that has developed consciousness but was never a human. And then you get into that grey area when you start talking about things that are demonic. And then I've spoken many a time about instances where I've been on a Ouija board, and a very particular instance where something came through and I'm absolutely convinced it wasn't anybody around me who was manipulating it, and it very much scared the person I was with because of what it came through with, and I would say that was a dark spirit. Now, I think what I've highlighted today is the idea of Mishlov and the Bigelow Consciousness Institute looking at these things, which I believe what they've done is shown that there is a persistence of at least knowledge after death, which probably you could substitute the word knowledge for consciousness. But I think probably what the big factor here with these things in here is the consciousness that is being proposed by the thinker, if you saw what I mean. Is that the dead person? Is that really the dead girl or the dead psychologist? Or is it something else that has assumed the knowledge?
Well, there's a couple of things that I was thinking of around this episode. I'll say actually this one first. I know we always go here, but if you go with we're in a simulation, then it would make sense because all that knowledge is held.
It would be there.
Would be held in a server somewhere,
yes.
And code could get messed up, or at point of death,
the Akashic records.
Yeah. The other thing I was thinking, if you go with the theory that these are the spirits of the dead exist and possession exists, it would make sense that you could be possessed in the sense of just a chess player or the daughter of someone rather than an evil entity, because it's why is it always evil? It doesn't kind of make sense in that.
Yeah.
And we tend to stereotypically think of ghost sightings that are not scary, spooky, of family members. We don't really associate that with possession, do we? We associate that with an apparition, a visitation, whereas possession it's an evil force that's trying to get at you. I guess the divider down the middle is, well, people are not possessed by the ghosts of dead humans; they're possessed by something else. But so this takes us into that realm. Yeah.
No, I agree. And I think that is probably... So I mentioned it before, Hungry Ghosts, and like some of those other stories that we've discussed where it isn't clear who is the protagonist. But perhaps the question that we should be asking is not whether consciousness survives, but who is running the algorithm of consciousness. If we can boil it down to that, who is running that? Because, what is the motivation for a dead psychologist to come up with something that would, propel his, I guess, what would you call them, consort into becoming a world-renowned psychologist when they were a tailor? What would they get out of that? Now, either the conventional wisdom would say, oh, well, that's just because they've got unfinished business and they've just seen what it can do to their, what their career was being held up by, and they've seen something else, they want to do that. But the other way of looking at it is, if they come back and present themselves as that, then it's completely safe and people accept it. But if they are, for example, feeding off the bad, the bad stories that are being told to him, and he's offering a solution which seems to work, which would attract more bad stories, is it possible that what is doing that just wants to feed off human misery? It is completely feasible. It's completely feasible.
But it wouldn't make sense in the chess experiment, that argument, would it? Because I don't see what they're getting out of that.
No, except for it could be a very playful. It could be a very playful spirit.
The equivalent of throwing a Lego brick around.
Yes, exactly. Yes. In the Enfield Poltergeist.
Yeah. Okay. An intellectual version of that. Yeah.
Yes. Exactly.
Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? A poltergeist wants to show off. If you know how to play chess, why wouldn't you show off by doing that? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, exactly. Yes, completely right. And And like I say, we'll never know. I mean, sadly, one day we will all know. But it's a very extraordinary story that these cases take, and it's an extraordinary essay. And Mishlove is so well respected, and he presents so much good evidence. And these things are not like poorly research. These things, they do have a lot of evidence behind them. I present you the story in its most sort of entertaining format, but they are to be examined and interrogated. But what you can't do is examine and interrogate the motivation behind whatever is driving them, and I think that's the thing. But I will say, for want of a good segue, there is, on the Extra Scoop today, I want to talk about something else that I have come across in terms of consciousness, which could reframe what we're talking about here. And it's some modern studies on consciousness, and it tells perhaps a different story about where that is coming from and who is, if you like, driving the car. Because I think it all comes down to who's driving the car.
Excellent. Well, if you want to hear that, come and join us at patreon.com/TQMpod. Become a Patreon member. And I don't know what Ben's going to be wowing my consciousness with. But, by the way, I never found my bottle opener. Right. Okay. I've got some ideas about the bottle opener. Okay. I have been working on it. Non-Patreon listeners might not know what we're talking about. Because I moved house, I lost a bottle opener that was kind of sentimental value to me. And Ben was
your wedding.
From the night of my wedding. Yes, we liberated it from a hotel, and we lost it, and Ben was going to find it. It was lost in the house, but when we moved, we couldn't find it. So it's a mystery.
I have some ideas I need to talk to you about, but we'll say that for the Extra Scoop. But like, genuinely, thank you everybody for everything, all the nice stuff you've been saying about us. I wanted to do a different episode today because I felt like we kept flip-flopping between ghosts and aliens, and I wanted to do something which was a little bit different. I think in terms of what's coming up, there is so much interesting stuff about the Vanishing Stars project, and also things that are coming out of the US Senate which haven't really been spoken about in terms of aliens. And also, thanks to our listeners, we've got some astonishing projects coming up later in the year, which include scientific evidence for ghosts. We don't know, we're going to take him out, but last week I had a conversation with an actual real professor about taking some actual scientific material to a supposedly haunted spot. So there's loads of stuff coming up in the quantum mechanics. Stay tuned.
Yeah, tell a friend. Great. Well, we will see you next week with more quantum mechanics weirdness.
Take care, guys.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Are you the quantum mechanics?